Good evening, everyone. Today we'll be talking about pediatric urinary tract infections and its management. First, I would like to start with a small case. A 2-month-old girl presented with fever. She was feeding well. There was no vomiting, diarrhea, rashes, or symptoms of upper respiratory tract infection. There was no history of prior UTI. On inquiring, the parents reported the presence of antenatal hydronephrosis in the scans, but she was not on antibiotic prophylaxis, and there was no evaluation of follow-up except for a single ultrasound in the neonatal period. Now, when she presented to the emergency, she was appearing well, though she was febrile. A catheter urine sample was obtained, which was sent for urine analysis, which was consistent with urinary tract infections. Urine culture pending, she was admitted and treated with IV antibiotics and symptomatically for fever. A review ultrasound was performed, which showed presence of minimal left-sided hydronephrosis. So after speaking with the family, the physicians felt that the finding was so subtle that it did not require any further evaluation, and therefore, when the child was well, symptomatically well, she was sent home with no antibiotic prophylaxis. So is this the right line of management which should have been done? What, according to you, all the residents, please? Anyone, if you would like to answer, is this the right line of management for this patient? One no, two no's, right. So this patient presented 3 weeks later with another episode of febrile UTI, and then she was evaluated and treated promptly. Repeat USG KUB was performed and a VCUG was planned. This is the ultrasound KUB films. The first film shows left-sided mild to moderate hydronephrosis. The bladder film is normal, and the right kidney also appears normal. So until now, we have only left-sided mild to moderate hydronephrosis. This was the VCUG, which shows filling, which shows VUR in the early filling phase, and ultimately it shows a high-grade VUR with intrarenal reflux also on the left side. Subsequently, a DMSA scan was performed, which shows left kidney function to be around 35%. And as you can see in the films, the left kidney has multiple scars. I would again like to tell you this child was just a 2-month-old child. On her second febrile UTI, these investigations were performed, and she already has multiple scars in her left kidney. So why is UTI important in children? Why is the diagnosis important in children? Approximately 30 to 50% of children, pediatric population with UTI, have underlying problems. And if you take into account the infants with urinary tract infection, this percentage rises to around 70%. So 70% of infants with UTI have underlying problems. And the symptoms can be vague and diagnosis can be easily missed. And failure to treat these infections will ultimately result in scarring, subsequent hypertension, loss of renal function, and ultimately end-stage renal disease. The incidence of UTI in children: 5% of girls and 2% of boys will have UTI during their childhood. Before 3 months of age, boys are more susceptible, and after 3 months of age, the incidence is approximately equal in both boys and girls. Now, coming to the pathogenesis, it's an interaction between the host and the bacteria. So, if the host immunity or the immune defense mechanisms gets weakened or the bacteria gains virulence, ultimately urinary tract infection will result. So this is a picture taken from Campbell, which shows the protective mechanisms in the host and the potentiating factors which can occur in the host. So the unobstructed urine transport and the unidirectional urine flow and the regular and complete bladder emptying acts as a protective mechanism against UTI. And presence of urolithiasis, which is not so common in children, presence of intrarenal reflux in a compound papilla, presence of VUR, presence of obstructive uropathy at any level, be it PUJO, be it UVJO, or be it posterior urethral valves can result in UTI. Presence of imbalanced voiding in the form of neurogenic bladder, constipation, presence of bladder diverticulae, presence of periurethral colonization, which is a very important factor in young children. That is soiling of the diapers, maybe because of encopresis, or inflammation in the perianal region due to diaper rash, or bubble baths with chemical irritants and harsh soaps and shampoos. Another important cause in males is phimosis. Now, coming to the organism, approximately 70 to 90% of urinary tract infections are caused by E. coli. The most common non-enteric gram-negative pathogen is Pseudomonas, which is occasionally seen in immunocompromised patients. The most common gram-positive pathogen is Enterococcus, and group B streptococci is usually seen in neonates. Now, I would like to mention about Proteus mirabilis, which is normally found in the foreskin of boys. So, in boys more than 1 year of age, Proteus is an important cause of UTI. Candida coagulase negative staph is an important cause in neonates, particularly after instrumentation or the long duration of IV antibiotics. And Klebsiella occasionally seen in immunocompromised patients. Now, coming to the risk factors for urinary tract infection, presence of anatomic abnormalities like VUR, obstructions or diverticular, female gender, uncircumscribed males, presence of voiding dysfunction is a very important cause, presence of constipation, history of instrumentation, P-fimbriated bacterial infections, and poor toilet training. Now, coming to the symptoms, often these symptoms are non-specific in neonates and infants. Fever, lethargy, refusal to feed, and seizures can be the only symptoms of urinary tract infection in neonates. In infants, they may present with fever, diarrhea, abdominal pain, and in older children, the symptomatology becomes more specific in the form of burning, urgency, frequency, flank pain, wetting, turbid or foul-smelling urine. Now, when you are encountered with a patient of urinary tract infection, there are few things that you must ask to the parents. The presence of frequency and urgency is very important, as it may denote the presence of underlying bladder instability. Questions regarding whether the child is holding the urine or straining may point towards dysfunctional voiding, and these are the holding maneuvers that a child performs usually to withhold urination if the child is busy playing or watching television or anything of that sort. So Vincent's curtsy sign is a holding maneuver in which the child holds his legs, crosses his legs, and the heels are pressed against the perineum. So these figures show the different postures in Vincent's curtsy. Now, the history of constipation is important. The drinking history is important. The quality and quantity of the drinking pattern, and intake of any bladder stimulants like caffeine. Bathing habits in the form of bubble bath or shampoo bath. These are irritants to the perineal region and can lead to external sphincter contractions. Now, coming to the diagnosis of UTI. First important thing is how to collect the specimen. The specimen can be collected via a clean catch midstream sample, or via urine bags, or via catheter sample, or via the suprapubic aspiration. The first two, that is the clean catch midstream and the urine bags, have a high contamination rate of more than 30%. So you should be very careful while explaining these procedure to the parents. Next is the rapid test of diagnosis. These are the urine dipstick samples for nitrites, leukocyte esterase, and urease. And the confirmation is always done by urine culture. Coming to the definition of significant bacteriuria. Presence of a pure growth of more than 10 to the power 5 colony forming units of bacteria per ml. Now, this definition of more than 10 to the power 5 is for a midstream clean catch sample. If the specimen is taken by a urinary catheter, lower counts may also be important. And any growth is clinically important if it is obtained by suprapubic aspiration. Now, coming to various terminologies, what is a simple UTI? Simple UTI refers to the presence of a low-grade fever, dysuria, frequency or urgency. So these are symptoms of lower urinary tract infection, and these referred to as simple UTI. Coming to complicated UTI, high-grade fever more than 38.5 or 100 degree Fahrenheit, presence of vomiting, dehydration, and renal angle tenderness. So these contribute to complicated UTI, and these are all symptomatology of upper urinary tract infection or pyelonephritis. Next is recurrent urinary tract infection. The definition of recurrent urinary tract infection is defined by differently by different guidelines. A simple definition would be a second attack of UTI by the same organism. However, O'Neill describes it as 3 repeated attacks of UTI within a 6 months period. And the NICE guidelines say that recurrent UTI is 2 episodes of complicated UTI, or 1 episode of complicated UTI and 1 episode of simple UTI, or 3 episodes of simple UTI. Breakthrough UTI. Breakthrough UTI is patient when develops an attack of UTI while the patient is on antibiotic prophylaxis. Coming to the initial management, in simple UTI, you can always treat the patient with oral antibiotics on an outdoor basis by giving amoxicillin, cotrimoxazole, or cephalosporin. Complicated UTI, you always have to admit the patient and start them on IV antibiotics. The duration of treatment for simple UTI is approximately 7 to 10 days, and in complicated, it is 10 to 14 days. Now comes the important part. What would be the further line of management or evaluation after the first febrile UTI? This is the IFE guidelines which is followed here. So after the first febrile UTI, you have to get a USG KUB irrespective of the age. And if the KUB is abnormal, you have to go for both DMSA and VCUG irrespective of the age. However, if the ultrasound is normal, then you have to look whether the child is less than 1 year of age, 1 to 5 years of age, or more than 5 years of age. In less than 1 year of age, you have to go for a VCUG first. And if VCUG shows VUR, then you have to go for a DMSA to look for scars. In the 1 to 5 year old group, you have to go for a DMSA first. And if DMSA shows scar, then only you have to go for a VCUG. Now, why is there a difference in both these groups? The first one, that is in less than 1 year of age group, first VCUG is performed, then DMSA. This is known as the bottom-up approach. And in 1 to 5 years of age, first DMSA, then VCUG. This is called the top-down approach. Now, what is top-down approach? As I've already mentioned, in a normal ultrasound in the 1 to 5 years of age group, you have to go for a DMSA scan first. So if you have a normal DMSA scan, the child is unlikely to have a high grade VUR, that is a dilating VUR of grade 3, 4, and 5. Therefore, we can also comment on the incidence of breakthrough infection. There are data that if the DMSA is normal, the incidence of breakthrough infection is only 6%. However, if the DMSA was abnormal, the incidence of breakthrough infection is as high as 60%. Patients with abnormal DSA also have a lower likelihood of spontaneous resolution of VUR. So by this approach, in the 1 to 5 year of age, we are trying to diagnose those patients which have a high grade VUR, so that we can put the patient on antibiotic prophylaxis, or we can go for any other line of management. So in this approach, we perform a DMSA 4 to 6 weeks after the last episode of UTI. If the DMSA is normal, reassure the patients that the kidney is fine and the child is unlikely to have a high grade VUR, and therefore you can skip the VCUG. However, if the DMSA is abnormal, you have to obtain a VCUG and consider observation versus antibiotic prophylaxis or surgery if VUR is present. and a repeat DMSA scan should be done in 4 to 6 months to diagnose the presence of new scars. So what is the advantage of this approach? It spares a lot of children from the trauma of VCUG. Obviously, DMSA has less than half radiation as that of a VCUG. It is also less invasive, and it also gives information about the health of the kidneys, which can be followed over time. So in 1 to 5 years of age, we don't want to subject every patient to a VCUG. We'll perform a DMSA first, and then if there is abnormal DMSA, we go for a VCUG. But in the less than 1 year of age group, we have to find any grade of VUR so that we can either put the patient on prophylaxis or we can plan further line of management. And if VUR is present, only then we'll go for a DMSA scan. That is the bottom-up approach. Now, the bottom-up approach is the most common approach followed worldwide by the American and the European Association. The top-down approach is mentioned only in the NICE guidelines, and IAP is the only guidelines which follows both of it by combining it in less than 1 year of age group by the bottom-up and 1 to 5 years of age group by top-down approach. Coming to antibiotic prophylaxis, what are the indications? These are the American Urology Association guidelines. In less than 1 year of age group, children with high grade VUR, that is grades 3 to 5, even if they have a history of febrile UTI or they do not, they have to be put on antibiotic prophylaxis. And in more than 1 year of age, with any grade of VUR, you have to first look for bowel bladder dysfunction. If bowel bladder dysfunction is present, you have to treat that, and also concomitantly, you have to start the patient on antibiotic prophylaxis. However, if the patient does not have a bowel bladder dysfunction, the guidelines say that antibiotic prophylaxis is optional. Now, why is there a stress on bowel bladder dysfunction? So the incidence of breakthrough UTI in patients with VUR with bowel bladder dysfunction is 82%. However, if the patient does not have a bowel bladder dysfunction, this incidence drops down drastically to only 18%. Hence, it shows the importance of bowel bladder dysfunction. And the spontaneous resolution of VUR is also affected by this condition. As you can see, with bowel bladder dysfunction, there is only 30% resolution of VUR with time. And if the patient does not have a bowel bladder dysfunction, the rate of spontaneous resolution, of the chances of spontaneous resolution of VUR rises to around 60%. Now, what is an ideal antibiotic to give for prophylaxis? Because you all know antibiotic prophylaxis has to be given for a long time until the baby is toilet trained. So the ideal antibiotic should be effective, non-toxic with few side effects, and it should not alter the natural flora, and it should not promote resistance. In less than 3 months of age, you cannot give cotrimoxazole and nitrofurantoin. So the ideal antibiotic in this age group would be cephalexin, 10 milligram per kg bedtime. So any antibiotic prophylaxis which is given in a single dose at a bedtime dose, and it is given in approximately half to 1/3 of the dose of the usual therapeutic dose of that antibiotic. So cephalexin has a normal therapeutic dose of 25 milligram per kg BD, and we give in antibiotic prophylaxis as 10 milligram per kg HS. Cotrimoxazole has a therapeutic dose of 4 milligram per kg of trimethoprim, and in antibiotic prophylaxis we give half of this dose, 2 milligram per kg HS. Nitrofurantoin has a therapeutic dose of 2 milligram per kg BD, and we give as 1 milligram per kg HS in case of antibiotic prophylaxis. Now, what are the measures by which we can reduce recurrent UTI? Avoid tight undergarments, plenty of fluids, avoid bladder irritants, regular and timed voiding, which is very important in children, and double voiding. Perineal hygiene and avoid shampoo or soap bubble baths. You have to look for constipation and control it, and circumcision in boys. Now, recently a circumcision, the stress on circumcision is very important, as circumcision has been found to decrease the risk of urinary tract infection in the first year of life by 64% in boys with hydronephrosis. Hence, in select group, you should offer circumcision as a line of treatment after discussing this with the parents. Now, if the patient develops a breakthrough UTI, what you should look for? The first important thing is the compliance, whether the child is actually taking the antibiotic or not, or he is spitting it out. Second, if the microbes are resistant to that antibiotic or not. Third is if the child is taking inadequate doses, you have put the patient on antibiotic prophylaxis. Now the child has grown and is still on the same dose as previously, so you have to titrate the dose. Next is the poor bladder emptying. If the patient has any concomitant bladder outlet obstruction, you have to look for it, and the presence of host immunity. You have to address all these issues, and you have to consider change of the antibiotic or go forward with surgical planning. Now coming to surveillance. Once you have diagnosed a case of febrile UTI having VUR, you have to get a urine culture monthly for 3 months after the last urinary tract infection, thereafter every 2 to 3 months. Renal imaging should be done 6 to 12 monthly. Renal and ultrasounds for the size of the kidney, and for focal scarring, you have to go for a renal scan. VCUG should be done yearly. You should record the growth yearly, height and weight, and blood pressure, as these childs who develop renal scars have the tendency to go to develop hypertension over time. So you have to monitor the blood pressure yearly and renal function test also yearly. Now, this is the last slide which I want to stress on. This is the radiation exposure on different radiographs which we take on a usual basis in our hospital. So a single chest X-ray has a mean dose equivalent of 0.1 to 0.2 millisievert. Now, if you look at X-ray lumbar spine, it is equivalent to around 75 chest X-rays. And conventional MCU, which we perform on a daily basis here, is 25 to 160 times a single chest X-ray. A DTPA scan has 18 to 45 times that of a single chest X-ray, and subsequently. So I would like all our residents to have this chart in mind whenever we go for any radiographic procedure, as we should be absolutely sure we are not subjecting the patient to unnecessary exposures, which might be very deleterious later life. Thank you.